Hey everyone, this is Rav Nathan. Over the next few minutes, I want to discuss with you the process of from slavery to service. Pesach, Passover. Everybody talks about Passover being the time of our freedom, Zman Cherutenu, the time of our liberty, our freedom. But it doesn't really make sense because the Jewish people went from slavery of Pharaoh to the service of God. I'm going to make some sense of that for you, and we're going to make it relative to your life, to my life today. You know, slavery doesn't just happen. Slavery is a process. Let's take a look at Abraham. Abraham was actually in Israel, Eretz Canaan, where I'm standing right now. And God comes to him in a time called Brit Ben Abatarim, a prophecy, the covenant of parts. And God comes and tells Abraham, listen, you are the head of the chosen people. From you will come great nations. From you will come the Jewish people, the chosen leaders of the world. But being chosen doesn't mean that life is perfect. The generations after you will in fact be slaves in a land that is not theirs for 400 years. But don't worry, Abraham, this is just part of a process. Now we see that the Jewish people in Egypt, after Joseph and Jacob then came down to Egypt, they knew that this was going to happen. They knew that their great-grandfather was told, Abraham, the generations after you will be slaves. So what did they do? They prepared for it. When Jacob came down to meet Joseph, he sent 2 of his sons to Egypt to set up yeshivot, Jewish learning institutions, so that when the family of Abraham would come down to Egypt and be reunited with Joseph, there would be a place for them to stay connected to who they are. They hadn't got the Torah yet. The Torah was not revealed to the world. But the family of Abraham were living a set of ideals. And Jacob wanted to make sure that those ideals stayed within his family, knowing that coming down to Egypt would become the beginning of their slavery. Slavery is very dangerous. It's all around us. Slavery doesn't just happen in the Torah. It's not just to the Jewish people. But let's take a look at what the Jewish people went through, how they prepared for it, and how they got through it. And you and I can learn lessons for our own freedom and slavery today. As I said, Jacob set up yeshivot, learning centers. That was the first step. The second step was that because slavery is all-encompassing, slavery means that you start to think like a slave. You act like a slave. You feel, your emotions are limited to slave feelings. And so what did the Jews do? They kept 3 reminders with them constantly that they truly were free people, even though they may have physically been under the rule of Pharaoh. They kept their garments, which were traditional for the Jewish people. They kept their names that were connected to the names they got from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And they kept their clothing, because the clothing that we wear is how we represent ourselves to the world. So it may be that we're being beaten as slaves by our slave drivers, but what we wear can present to the world that we are free people. The language we use, although around us we may be pushed down by a whole lot of different slavery, the language we use needs to be a language of freedom. And the names that we give ourselves signifies the redemption that we pass on to our children, the reminders of who they are, although they may be surrounded by a society of slavery. What does slavery actually mean? If we can understand what slavery means, then we can understand what freedom means. Slavery is when I don't choose. Slavery is that I have to do what you want, when you want, how you want. And I have no say in how that happens. But if that's true, then when the Jewish people left Egypt and went straight to serve God, who told us what to do, when to do, and how to do it, what's the difference between that and Pharaoh? It's an amazing question, isn't it? That's what Pesach is all about. That's what Passover is all about. Let's talk about a few modern leaders who led people to freedom, and we can understand it on a deeper level. One of the greatest leaders to freedom in our generation was Martin Luther King. What a man. What an inspirational man. We know that his famous speech, "I Have a Dream," but there's another speech that he gives. It's called the Mountaintop Speech, where he really parallels himself to be like Moses. He says, "I've been to the mountaintop, and I will not make it to the promised land, but you will, because of something that I started." That's a leader. That's freedom. He was still under the rule of America that didn't give him rights, but he thought like a free man. He led people like a free man. He dressed and walked like a free man. And he wasn't afraid of dying. He said it in that speech. He said, "Longevity is wonderful. Everyone wants to live forever, but I don't worry about that now because I've seen the promised land. I know what freedom is. Although I am in a body, in a society of slavery, I am already living freedom." Man, that's amazing. And what did he lead his people to? When he led the black people of America to freedom, it wasn't a freedom that he turned to them and said, "You can do whatever you want once we get our rights." He was fighting for the right for the black people to have the same ability to give to society that the white man had. He wanted voting. He wanted people to be able to vote. That's not saying I want freedom. That's saying I want responsibility. I want to be able to have my people lead people like the white people are leading people. The same thing with Nelson Mandela. We all know that Nelson Mandela's freedom could have been a bloodbath. It could have been that he led the people to slaughter the white people of South Africa. The numbers of black people far overran those white people. But Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King both led their people to responsibility, to be a part of the government, to create rule for their people and other people on a free playing field. Let's take a look at how society sees freedom. Freedom means that I'll take another loan so that I can buy another car. Freedom means that I should be able to go on holiday whenever I want. Freedom means that I work hard so I should get a bonus, whether I take responsibility or not. Freedom means that I can leave my children at home in front of the TV and not care what they're going to see, because I have the right to do what I want, when I want, how I want. But true freedom is not that. That's slavery. Because that way of living our lives pushes us down. It allows the bank to be our Pharaoh. It allows society to be our Pharaoh. And the worst thing of all, it gives our children a slave mentality. So what's Pesach about? Pesach is about true freedom. Pesach is about the Jewish people leaving Egypt, that physical and emotional slavery, and moving on to a physical, emotional, and spiritual freedom of responsibility. That's why 50 days after leaving Egypt, we didn't go and party. We didn't have a massive party in the desert that people do today. We went to receive from Mount Sinai, from God, the word that would tell us how we are meant to lead the world, what responsibility we should take on. That's true freedom. Why? Because it does tell me what to do, when to do, and how to do to be the best person I can be, to be the greatest leader I can be. You know, I was reading my children Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the famous book, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And what's the difference between Charlie and all those other kids? All of those other kids want to come to the factory so that they can eat the chocolate, so that they can eat the sweets and take as many as they can. And they all end up drowning in chocolate or being stuck in or attacked by squirrels or whatever the things are. But Charlie knows that he's coming to that chocolate factory to learn how to run the place, how to take responsibility. And when he gets given that chocolate factory, he can have as much chocolate as he wants, because he understands the responsibility to create those chocolate bars for the world. I want to challenge you and me. This Pesach, let's ask ourselves, what's true freedom? Let's not move from slavery to slavery. Let's move from slavery to service, the true freedom. And let's make sure our children follow.